The professional discussion is a central and crucial element of every moderation visit. When handled effectively, it is a supportive yet challenging process which enables teachers to articulate their understanding of the standards and the teacher assessment frameworks. It also allows moderators to feel confident in the judgments awarded. The professional discussion is the chance to talk through and validate pupils' written evidence, which supports teachers' assessment judgments for writing, and it should provide a shared understanding of how judgments have been reached, and the opportunity to discuss any gaps in evidence against the teacher assessment framework. Most teachers will demonstrate a good understanding of the writing assessment framework during professional discussions. However, teachers with less experience may sometimes find it more difficult to articulate their understanding of certain statements and to evidence those statements. This video explores how the moderator can be supportive when a teacher is less confident in articulating good understanding and how they can work with them to identify specific gaps in their knowledge. It also highlights how the exemplification materials could be used to support teachers' understanding of the framework statements and help them identify evidence of attainment of those statements in pupil work. In this first clip, we see a teacher struggling to fully articulate their understanding of cohesion and to adequately exemplify cohesion in a set of pupil work which has been assessed as meeting the expected standard for Key Stage 2.
Okay, let's move on to cohesion. Do you want to talk me through how you feel this pupil demonstrates that statement?
Yeah, I think you just get the feel that it all flows, it all hangs together. It seems to be sequenced logically, doesn't jump around, it just flows from beginning to end, really.
Okay, and do you want to kind of drill down and talk to me about some of the devices the pupil has used?
Devices?
Yeah, so the statement gives some examples, maybe conjunctions, adverbials. Can you find me any of those?
Yeah, well, we've got adverbs and adverbials. Yeah, there's some pronouns, lots of conjunctions throughout. It definitely flows.
Okay, and when you're finding those examples within the work, can you sort of talk to me about how those examples really sort of go through making it cohesive?
I think it's about the sequencing of it. So again, if we look at this letter here, you've got your introduction and then you've got your first point. Secondly is then putting the points into order. Here we've got, again, linking back to a previous point, if you agree to this, so we're linking back to the point that they've just raised.
You might like to pause the video to reflect. How would you go about supporting this teacher? The moderator has asked a very broad question, without first attempting to elicit the already nervous teacher's understanding of cohesion, or to scaffold their answers through more targeted questions. They also failed to put the teacher at their ease, so this encounter feels more like a test than a collaborative discussion between equal professionals. In this second clip, the moderator takes a different approach.
Okay, so we've had a look at the vocabulary and how some of the grammatical structures have been used. I think it'd be really useful at this point now to talk about how they link specifically to cohesion within the piece, but I think it might be useful for us to talk about what cohesion really looks like and means before we drill down any further.
I think, yeah, for me, it's just the way that the piece flows, the way it all hangs together, the progression from beginning to end. You just get the idea that it links, it's in a well-structured sequence.
Yeah, definitely. And it's about looking at the sentences, how they flow together within a paragraph and then across the piece as a whole. So the statement sort of gives examples of the devices, maybe conjunctions, adverbials, pronouns, and then it's for us to kind of look at, how do those choices really lend to cohesion throughout the piece and keep it all linked together, flowing like you mentioned.
Yeah, I've probably not nailed it down as tightly as that. I've looked at, there are examples of adverbs and adverbials, lots of pronouns, conjunctions throughout it, but I've not necessarily made that link between how that does create the cohesion. Yeah,
and it's tricky, isn't it? There's so much to think about, but I think what's really useful at this point maybe would be to look at some of the exemplification, find examples within there and kind of draw on how you can see that helps the piece be cohesive, and then go back to your writing and it'll become much easier to pull out those examples that you've already found.
You may want to pause the video for a moment and consider the difference between the two clips. This moderator's more scaffolded approach encourages the teacher to reflect openly on their understanding of the standards and to be receptive to guidance from the moderator and the exemplification materials. While moderators are not required to use the exemplification materials during professional discussions, they can be used effectively to support a shared understanding of the standards. They also exemplify what the people can statements might look like in written work, and thus may support a teacher's ability to find examples of the statements in their own pupils' writing. In a continuation of this second scenario, the moderator refers to Morgan, whose work is included in the exemplification materials for the expected standard at the end of Key Stage 2.
So I think now might be a really useful time to kind of go back to the exemplification materials. Obviously these are non-statutory examples, but there's a real range of genres, text types within there for us to see what cohesion looks like in those different pieces. Okay. So would you find that quite helpful?
Yeah, I think it'd be good to see how they're used.
Definitely, and I think the more that we kind of go through these pieces, you go back to your writing and you see how it just jumps out at you. So in piece A, Morgan writes a short story, and you can see how it kind of talks about cohesion, giving examples around adverbials. So you can see, for example, some of these paragraphs. So suddenly, everything started to shake. Next paragraph, all of a sudden. Next paragraph, slowly. So you can see how those different choices keep it linked together nicely and move the piece forward through time. I think in the recount, it gives some really good examples when talking about cohesion around synonymous referencing. So the pupil is writing a recount about a Viking day, and they introduce the man that's come to deliver that. It was a man dressed in linen, and then goes on to talk about the man being Gary. And then Gary becomes back to the man, but then he. So rather than it just being Gary, 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 or the man, the man, the man, you can see how the pupil has tried to vary the choices there to keep it a little bit more interesting, not repetitive.
Yeah, I see that.
Yeah, hopefully that's useful. Similar, we've got piece D, the short story, very similar to the first story. So we've got one spooky night, but within the same paragraph, all of a sudden. So you can see how we're talking about within paragraphs and across paragraphs, keeping it cohesive there through those choices. Piece C, we've got a letter. So they've written to Gary to give him some feedback on the visit. And the child's used some nice examples of determiners, adverbials, pronouns again to kind of keep it moving and linked together quite nicely. So you can see in this paragraph, first of all, I loved it when we were sitting on and you were telling us that story. A little bit of ellipsis there to kind of keep it all flowing. And then we've got, that was one of my favourite parts of the day. Another one of my favourite parts. So you can see how they're varying up and not just saying my favourite part, my favourite part, my favourite part. They're trying to draw on a range of devices there to keep it interesting, keep it flowing. Does that help?
It does, yeah.
Yeah, should we go back and see if we can find any of those examples in your pupils' writing?
So I guess in this one here, this is a short narrative, and they make reference to a dragon earlier on. Yeah. And then here they refer to it as its. So talking about the dragon's master, so using the pronouns again, just to avoid that repetition. Definitely. I guess that would be an example of how they do that.
And I think these are such a useful tool, and it's just really important to be mindful that we're not saying it must look like that in there. These are just a support, a tool for us to use what it could look like. These are some examples. What does that look like in our writing? Yeah.
In this final clip, the moderator models using the exemplification materials to demonstrate how the word choices and grammatical structures listed in the framework statements might be used to build cohesion in written work. They draw attention to a variety of devices and how they build cohesion in different ways, between and across sentences, paragraphs and whole pieces. By examining examples in Morgan's work, the teacher is then more able to identify examples of the statement in their own pupils' work. This collaborative process has been a positive experience and has resulted in a deeper shared understanding of this aspect of writing and empowered the teacher to be more confident when articulating their understanding of this statement.